Can do is more than just an attitude. Can do is extraordinary support in extraordinary times. It's the knowledge and expertise to harness opportunities. Can do is empowering you to get your plans back on track. Can do is Canaccord Genuity Wealth Management. Visit candowealth.com to see how we can help you build your wealth with confidence. Investment involves risk and you may not get back what you invest. It's not suitable for everyone.
It's the week ending Saturday the 25th of June, and this is the Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen the cancelling of services across the British rail network in the biggest strike action for over 30 years, a powerful earthquake in Afghanistan killing at least 250 people, and Rupert Murdoch and Jerry Hall reportedly divorcing after 6 years of marriage. But we're here to bring you some stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Ollie Mann, and let's unwrap the week. And joining me today from The Week magazine, it's Leif Arbuthnot. For a second week running, you lucky people, it's science writer at The Eye, Tom Chivers, and forthcoming Edinburgh Fringe superstar Sachandrika Chakrabarti. Buy your tickets now. What's the show called, Sachandrika?
It's called I Miss Amy Winehouse.
Okay, and what's it about, if the title didn't tell us enough?
It's about the noughties and nostalgia and our relationship to celebrity and about grief. And it is comedy, yes.
To answer the implicit question that description
It is so funny, guys.
poses. All right, Leif, you're kicking us off today. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
The unexpected return of house music.
She seems omnipresent, right? She's everywhere when it comes to music, movies, entertainment, fashion, you name it. But just the mere mention, the hint of new music a couple of weeks sent people into a frenzy. The official announcement about music sent people into a bigger frenzy. But now this new song, she's sending people to the club.
Good morning, America. Getting very excited about a new single from a certain star performer. Leif, who are they talking about? What's the story?
They're talking about a little-known singer called Beyonce, and she's just released a track called "Break My Soul," which is a sort of departure for Beyonce in that she's raiding some of the sounds of house music. People have also noticed that Drake, another major global star, last week released an album that also draws on kind of housey sounds and dance music.
Yeah, kind of housey sounds. I had to listen to the Drake album, as you'd expect. It's sort of sad house, isn't it?
Yeah. It's got Drake's album has lots of kind of crooning, as you would expect from him. But Beyonce's track is much more kind of obviously house inspired and draws
House
on
in the sunshine rather than house in the rain.
Yeah, exactly. And draws on Robin's song "Show Me Love," samples it.
Okay, but so what? I mean, a story about Beyonce releasing a single, that is big news, because she's one of the biggest stars in the world, but not underreported. So what's the bit we're missing?
Well, I think it has interesting things to say about what people want from their music right now. There are some people online who think that basically music has got too depressing and dark, and this music is basically intended to let people escape into the sound. And the idea is that you'll listen to it in a club surrounded by other people. During the pandemic, we've obviously been stopped from spending a lot of time with other people and experiencing kind of mass euphoria. And I think that this music is an indication that some of the big stars are trying to help people return to that kind of experience, which happens collectively.
Or maybe, Tom, it's just evidence of the age of the stars we're talking about. I mean, when Beyonce goes back to her happy place, she's thinking of the 90s. Before she was famous.
I mean, but bear in mind, Beyonce was famous in about 1997 or something like that. She's about my age. She doesn't look quite as good now as I do, obviously. But
that's the big shock, isn't it? You'll never guess.
Yeah.
Beyonce's the same age as Tom Chivers.
I know. Honestly, I think she's a few months younger, she's been famous since she was in her teens. So I don't know if how much not famous life she had. But yeah, I mean, someone of my age, for example, me, has very happy memories of listening to Candy Staton or Almond Van Helden and people in clubs in Manchester in the late 1990s, and lots of people with eyes like saucers, and reach for the lasers and all that sort of stuff. So yes, I guess there's a straightforward nostalgia of people in their 40s looking back at what they did when they were young and having fun.
And that in itself, Sachandrika, could be said to be a bit dispiriting because, we've talked with you on the show a few times over the past few years about, post-pandemic, VE Day is going to come and there'll be a vibe shift and there'll be bright new things. And the young people doing what's nostalgic for 40-year-olds, isn't that cool, is it?
Young people love doing stuff from the 90s. Come on, like Gen Z, they love a bit of 90s stuff. What they do with it is remix it and play with it and make it things we can't understand. But I do think with Beyonce, firstly, she wasn't clubbing in the 90s. She wasn't allowed out, was she? She was at home being told to get her singing lessons. So maybe it's the first time for her. But not to get into my story too soon, because it's coming up a bit later, but is Beyonce not referencing the big resignation? I think she's telling workers to unionize. Let's get into these lyrics very quickly. I just fell in love. I just quit my job. That's a big move. I'm going to find new drive. Damn, they work me so hard. Is she talking about big industry bosses? Or is she talking about her parents? Who can say? Work by 9, then off past 5, and they work my nerves, and I cannot sleep at night. Now, who has not felt like that in the last couple of years? She's singing for the people.
Is she capturing the mood, Leaf, or is she just cynically tapping into the zeitgeist? Like Madonna did the first time round, adopting some of these music trends into her pop song.
I think she's probably doing a bit of both. I see Beyonce with actually quite little affection. My first album was that I ever bought was a Destiny's Child album. But I think in recent years, she's so obsessed with her own kind of public image that I think there's something slightly glazed about her kind of presence on the kind of world stage. So I do see some cynicism in this, but I also think that the track is, to use a technical term, a banger, and I'm really happy that she's released it because people are going to really enjoy dancing to it, and actually she's got back to something that she's truly good at, which is singing well to some good tunes.
Yeah, but there's also a link, isn't there? I mean, the sort of politics that she's been embracing, Sachandrika, recently has been around Black Lives Matter, etc., with her last album, and with this, there seems to be a link that's more explicit than perhaps it used to be when people did house music with the LGBTQ plus community, specifically the African-American variant of that, Frankie Knuckles, etc.
Yeah, so Beyonce sent some checks out and she made it very clear that she's aware of the roots of house music and she's aware that without pioneers, people who didn't have a voice necessarily, who were sidelined, without those people, this music wouldn't exist. And so she's made it very clear that I'm going to pay homage to these creators, and she sort of shouted them out, which is a really good way of going around this. I think usually when people remix different genres, they try to sort of claim it as their own, maybe like I'm a pioneer, it's all me. But she's going, no, let's look at the history and let's give thanks to people and also money, which is really important.
Yeah, I don't know which of you is best equipped to give us a potted history on house music, so I'll leave it open. Does anyone want to step in and explain what the significance of it was?
Funnily enough, I've just been thinking about when I was in a club, Bugged Out, the Nation Club in Liverpool in 1999, when a friend of mine gave me exactly that potted history, extreme, with his eyes like bulging out of his head as he did so, and did talk about the, Frankie Knuckles chopping up tapes because they didn't have mixing desks and doing it in these clubs in New York. But I was thinking as I was reading the story about Beyonce, how little I knew that it was to do with gay and LGBT culture in New York at the time. And so I'm afraid, unless I could leap back 22 years.
Well, I know that it all kind of started, the word house comes from this club in Chicago in the late 70s called The Warehouse. And it was where black gay men kind of congregated. And that's really where the music started bubbling up. And so, and then it kind of leaked out into kind of more mainstream. And it was drawing on disco music that was kind of being sort of redone to produce this kind of euphoric experience in the club. And then it, became much more normalized in other types of music. So its roots are in basically black gay culture in Chicago.
And I guess Sachandrika, she doesn't have to. I mean, you were just sort of implying she doesn't have to talk about the roots of it, but she sort of doesn't have to do it at all. I mean, Beyonce's at a stage now where she wouldn't have to release a single and she'd still be Beyonce, but also almost whatever she released. I mean, if she chose to release a cover from The Lion King again, people would go crazy for that. So she doesn't have to do this. Why do you think she is?
Well, I think, everyone wants to remain relevant, and listening to this song, like, I will agree with Leaf, it is a banger. I would like to go to a club and dance to it now, except for my creaky knees, and they probably wouldn't let me in. But it's kind of the least distinctive of her songs ever. So I do think there's a compromise between the Beyonce that I think of, with these anthems are often about female empowerment. They're often very individual. You think of her in a music video at the centre of it all, and with this one, it feels almost like it could be anyone, but it's about getting lost in that music and regaining control of our lives where we had to stop going out and stop socializing. So maybe this is a trend she's tapping into, but she's kind of allowing her image to not be the center of this song so much. I mean, she's really putting on a persona. We know she doesn't work a 9 to 5. We know she hasn't quit her job because this is her job.
Far from it. She just spent a year and a half in the studio.
She just did more of her job. And so this is a kind of persona, and you've got to think of it that way, that it's a song where she's trying to capture the mood of the moment, because all artists want to do that. And I think she's done a pretty good job of it. And again, like, I'm not like a fan of everything she does. I enjoyed this.
Do you get the sense that she's right, though, Tom, that it is the mood of the moment? That people, having had the 2 years we've just had, are desperate to get out there and socialise and be in sweaty, indoor, claustrophobic environments? Because, just to put a downer on this, with your perspective as a science writer, COVID numbers are up again, aren't they, in this country? And you do wonder whether actually, come Christmas, nightclubs are very much not going to be flavour of the moment again.
Firstly, you're asking a 41-year-old who didn't really have much of a sense of what the zeitgeist was when he was young, what the zeitgeist is now. But but yeah, it does seem there's a lot of, it could completely make sense to me if people are very keen to get out and have fun and be sweaty in clubs. Although, to be honest, in this weather, you could be sweaty anywhere. That said, about the COVID side of things, you may be right. You may be right that there is going to be that COVID numbers are up, but COVID numbers have been doing this weird thing of going up and going down and up, going up and going down. And if you want to worry about it, you can look at them when they're going up, and if you want to be chilled out about it, you can look at them when they're going down. Basically, they've been quite unpredictable, but wobble around. We may face a difficult winter. Winter is it will be likely the bad time, but we may also, most people are vaccinated. Everyone who's not vaccinated has had the disease. So my moderately confident suspicion is you'll still be able to go to Bugged Out or wherever, if that's even still open. It was great. You should go. You'll still be able to go to super clubs and listen to house music in December and January. And I hope that is still the case, because I like young people having fun. It was a lot of fun when I did it.
Yeah, I mean, is that your sense as well, Leaf, that the majority of people would agree with that message? Let's go back out into sweaty rooms. Or I don't know, I just feel like, with Zoom and TikTok, I know it's a bit of a cliche, but there is this thing of people maybe actually, it's been so long now, they've defaulted into smaller groups. They feel a bit uncomfortable as part of huge crowds.
I do think that young people are more anxious and perhaps less, inclined to take loads of drugs and completely lose control than maybe other generations. But my sense is, having recently been to a festival with, there was, lots of young people were there. They seemed extremely excited to be back, having a great time. So I think that probably the song matches the moment.
Okay, Tom, you're up next after this.
Can Do is more than just an attitude. Can Do is extraordinary support in extraordinary times. It's the knowledge and expertise to harness opportunities. Can Do is empowering you to get your plans back on track. Can Do is Canaccord Genuity Wealth Management. Visit candowealth.com to see how we can help you build your wealth with confidence. Investment involves risk, and you may not get back what you invest. It's not suitable for everyone.
Tom, your turn. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
For hopefully winning a skirmish in the war against cancer.
Well, I think this whole thing has been just a struggle, like a tug of war between head and heart, really. Because I think when you get a diagnosis like that, I mean, I think everybody is the same, right? It's like the world has just collapsed underneath you. And I think everybody is just terrified. And that's true of me as much as it is for everybody else.
Mathematician and broadcaster Hannah Fry speaking to BBC Breakfast earlier this month. And Tom, she's recently made a documentary about her cancer, hasn't she? But there's an underreported story that you want to present to us today that might give us some cause for optimism.
Yeah, sure. So it was a presentation of a scientific paper at a conference, which was later published in New England Journal of Medicine, which was very small and very specific, but it was that 14 patients who had a particular kind of colorectal cancer were given a particular kind of immunotherapy, a drug that helps your immune system target cancers, and all 14 of them were, as far as we can see, completely cured, which is astonishing. I mean, we have to be incredibly careful. It's a very small study, and again, I want to really stress that this is only one kind of colorectal cancer, not all kinds. But it is one piece of a much broader story of advances in cancer therapies in the last few years, and it has really been an astonishing time to watch how our progress in the fight against this disease has gone on.
Okay, that isn't much discussed, really. So what have we been missing?
Well, I mean, a couple of times I've written about this. There was, but I spoke to an oncologist, a guy who treats, studies and treats cancer, and who specializes in malignant melanoma a few months ago. And he told me that when he got into the field, he's been doing it for 20 years, and for 10 of those years or something like that, he couldn't do anything. Just, if you turned up with metastatic melanoma, it was pretty much a death sentence. Median survival time was months, maybe a year. It was really, if it had spread around and they couldn't just take it off with surgery, then it was going to kill you almost always. But then they developed this stuff called immunotherapy. I think it was ipilimumab was the one they started with, although I should probably have checked that before I confidently announced it. But and what it does is it tells your immune system how to look for the cancer. Cancer is really good at hiding from your immune system, and this takes away the invisibility cloak, or takes the brakes off your immune system, and your immune system is lethal when it wants to be. And you get, so I know 2 people who were diagnosed with metastatic melanoma nearly 10 years ago. In other timelines, those people are long dead now, but they're both fine. They play bridge with each other. It's wonderful. So and you see this in lots of areas where most of the progress has been in either immunotherapy, which is really successful against various solid cancers like head and neck, or melanoma, or colorectal, and there's other progress against other forms, but there's also been marvelous progress in how we use radiotherapy. We can target it much more precisely at the cancer itself, so you can give much higher doses that kill the cancer without destroying the tissue around it. And lots of people now will get cancer and will live with it for decades, and it won't kill them. It'll become a chronic disease. And it's not all, and it's different for different cancers, but it has been astonishing to watch.
And obviously that's great news, Leaf. But the bit of it that I guess people notice is that lots and lots of people get cancer. It can feel to people like more people than ever are getting cancer. And obviously that doesn't seem like a good news story.
No, it doesn't. But the whole point of why so many people are getting cancer is that cancer is a disease that comes about when we age, and because we're living longer and longer, although that rate is slowing and in some Western countries declining, cancer is becoming a sort of greater killer. So it's obviously, that's not the first thing that will come into your mind if you're sitting in being told that you have cancer. That's a terrible moment. But in some ways, the dominance of cancer is reflects a sort of broadly positive story about the length of our lives.
And so, Chandrika, if it means less chemotherapy, I mean, that is probably the most barbaric of cancer treatments. That would mean a lot to patients, wouldn't it, to have a menu of less invasive treatment in the future?
Well, something I think we learned a lot about during the COVID lockdowns is people living with immunosuppression or compromised immune systems. And so when you're on chemotherapy, when you're on these cures for cancer, which do work and lead to people going into remission and not dealing with the cancer again, fact is they end up with other problems. It leaves their body and the immune system open to picking up colds that could become full-blown huge problems. Obviously, with COVID still around, we're still in a pandemic, it leads to people having to shield, having to live smaller and more, lives more full of worry. So it's not ideal to rely on chemo because it's quite a blunt instrument and it kills a lot of healthy tissue as well as the cancerous tissue. But there have been some breakthroughs that could help with targeting, if you want me to just quickly go into them. There's another part of this good news story with cancer is that scientists can harness light therapy to target and kill cancer cells. And this is a world first. It's been a revolutionary cancer treatment that came out in the news about 2 weeks ago, so they can wipe out microscopic cancer cells, and this will really help surgeons effectively target and destroy the disease. So, European team of engineers, physicists, neurosurgeons, biologists, immunologists, like the whole gang got together from the UK, Poland, and Sweden, and they are doing something called photoimmunotherapy. The word is growing. They will need to look at that. But it does really target the cancer cells and really avoids damaging the cells around it, which would just lead to such a high quality of life. And some of the deaths that occur after having chemo will not be to do with the cancer itself, it would be to do with the fact that the immune system couldn't fight off a much easier to treat disease in someone else.
And yet, looking at UK survival rates, Tom, we score lower, don't we, than other Western countries? Why is that?
We do, and it's probably for a variety of reasons. If you look at our 5-year survival rates for various cancers and you compare us to there's a big study done at Oxford recently about looking at countries like Canada, Australia, Denmark, Ireland, Norway, New Zealand. They, sort of roughly comparable countries to us, and we consistently come at the bottom or near the bottom for survival rates in, well, the 6 cancers that I've that they looked at were colon, lung, esophagus, pancreas, rectum, and stomach. So we are just not doing very well at it. There obvious possible reasons, like underinvestment in healthcare. There are less obvious possible reasons, but a lot of it is survival rates in the elderly and people not coming forward early enough in the cancer progress. So a lot of people are only found at acute moments. So a lot of bowel cancer patients are only spotted when they turn up at A&E with an impacted bowel, and that is a really bad situation to turn up in. So the UK. The story is one of general progress. That's true in the UK as well, but it's a story of general progress where we started out lower than everybody else and we are still lower than everybody else. We're better than we were, but we still haven't caught up. And I suspect underinvestment in the NHS or in health service is part of that story, and also something to do with we are not finding cancer patients early enough and sending them to the right place. And I have no good policy prescription for how you sort that out, I'm afraid.
Well, one prescription, arguably, is get some influencers, right? I mean, no one wants to get diagnosed with cancer, but it's been obvious recently, hasn't it, that when people like pop stars, for example, have had cancer diagnoses, they've been much more open talking about it, Leaf, than they used to be. I'm thinking about, for example, no longer with us, sadly, but Tom Parker from The Wanted, Sarah Harding from Girls Aloud. We had Adele Roberts from Radio 1 on the front of a health magazine with her stoma bag recently. I mean, that's stuff that wasn't happening 20 years ago, isn't it? And that you'd hope would encourage at least younger people to think it's not something to be suppressed, when I suspect there might be something wrong.
Yeah, I definitely think that Instagram stars can fan younger people into getting diagnosed more, but can fan younger people into going for more regular checkups. Of course, cancer tends to be got by older people. So while it's excellent if we can get train young people into going to the doctor very regularly, those habits might not pay off very much in the data for a few years. There was an interesting study that came out a couple of months ago, I think in the Lancet, which showed that over a third of cancer cases in the UK are diagnosed when people are rushed to A&E. Which is pretty horrendous. You think that there's nothing wrong with you, then something really bad happens, and then you find out basically on the trolley that there's something something in your body's gone extremely badly wrong. So that there's certainly improvements to be made, and yet it's worth to steer it back towards good vibes. That there is much more awareness than there used to be.
Beyonce vibes.
Yeah, right. For instance, my friends definitely sort of hassle each other to go for checks, and it seems to be much more natural to younger people to kind of take your body seriously in the way that young people sometimes take their mental health seriously, and see it as something to be kind of looked after. So yeah, I think that there are positive signs that maybe major changes in this area are kind of afoot.
And actually, I guess the culture, again, to go back to our first story in a way, Chandrika, but the culture has changed to the extent that now it wouldn't feel weird for anyone to share their cancer diagnosis on their social network. Like, actually, they'd feel like they weren't being their genuine selves if they didn't. I mean, that's a change we've seen in the last 10 years. It used to be that people would be like, why would you tell everybody that?
We have Dame Deborah James at the moment, who's sort of in palliative care and maybe reaching the end of her life, who's given a damehood recently. She was known as Bowel Babe online, and she's raised loads and loads of money for research into bowel cancer, which is surprisingly high rates in quite young people. And so that's kind of the difficult story with cancer, is that every single cancer is very different. It does sound like we need a kind of education campaign. And the problem with people turning up at A&E is quite worrying as well. And you're kind of wondering that, that kind of 10 minutes you get with the GPs, is that kind of enough? Because cancer symptoms can look like lots of other things, can't they? You need that trained eye to say all of these together add up to something a bit bigger. Let's send you off for that screening. And it sounds like maybe where the UK is lagging behind is getting people to that screening early enough and getting the right people in. But sure, like cancer was not spoken of back in the 60s. I remember my aunt, who was young back then, telling me that there'd be a veil of silence when a relative died of cancer, and it was shameful to speak of it. And that seems so shocking to me now. And we saw with Jade Goody. Do you remember Jade Goody from Celebrity Big Brother and, from reality TV? When she died of cervical cancer, the rates of screening went up really quickly. And I think partly it's a reminder that there's something serious behind these screening campaigns. But the point is to then keep them going, because those rates have fallen down now that she's sort of not in the collective consciousness anymore. And so that really comes back to the NHS, that they need to keep reminding people in the right age bracket, people with like the BRCA1 gene or that kind of thing, like to come in for screening. They managed to do that with diabetes and other kind of risk factors. So with cancer, we probably need to do a better job with those things.
Leave.
And the government announced earlier this month that they were going to run a pilot of pharmacists basically being able to refer patients directly to GPs if they present at a pharmacy with symptoms that could be cancer. So there are efforts afoot to essentially speed up the diagnosis process, which is quite exciting.
There are difficulties, though, aren't there, with measuring the success of defeating the disease because of a problem called lead time bias. Tom, if you could just very briefly explain to us what that is.
Sure. Okay. So cancer survival statistics are measured in 5-year survival rates, or a survival rates after a certain time. If you're diagnosed on January 2021, are you still alive in January 2026? Now there are two ways you could extend that survival rate. You could make people live longer, or you could diagnose them earlier. So if you spotted the cancer earlier in the cancer's progress, they're more likely to live for 5 years after you diagnose it, but they'd still die at the exact same time they would have done anyway.
Because the cancer takes 6 years to kill them regardless.
So if you imagine every cancer takes exactly 6 years to kill you, and we used to diagnose it 2 years after it arises, then no one will survive to 5 years. If we start diagnosing it 6 years before it kills you, everyone will survive to 5 years, but they'll all still live 6 years.
So what would be a better mechanic then than 5-year cycles at all?
Firstly, we have improved diagnostics and screening, so this does change things. Nonetheless, it still gives you a decent sense of what's going on, and there are ways of cleverly adjusting for it. So, for instance, the website Our World in Data, which does this brilliant job of breaking down data on a variety of topics, it does show that even when you control for the size of the cancer, which is a reasonable, proxy measure for how long it's been there, survival rates have gone up. So that suggests that does make a difference, and that would make sense, because the smaller a cancer is, the less likely bits of it will have shed off and got around your body and turned up somewhere else, which is when it gets really dangerous. So you would expect, to be honest, earlier diagnosis to improve survival rates all on its own. So yes, lead time bias is a statistical problem, but when we try and take account for that problem, it does still seem that cancer survival rates are improving.
Good. That's the takeaway we're all going to have from today's episode, and that's a nice thing to have. Okay, so Chandrika, you're up next after this. All right, so Chandrika, you are finishing the show. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
You've got to fight for your right to unionize.
By a nearly 2-to-1 margin, workers at the Apple Store in Towson, Maryland, voted to unionize, the first Apple store to take that step. In May, these workers sent a letter to Apple CEO Tim Cook saying they had the support from a solid majority, adding they wanted more rights to information and collective bargaining.
We're literally the face of Apple. How is it fair that we are being dictated as to what to do, what to say, how to act, but we don't get any say in any of the things that are happening in our everyday lives?
Apple has yet to publicly respond, but they did recently raise hourly wages from $20 to $22.
Paddy Kohana reporting for Al Jazeera on Tuesday. So, Suchandrika, some Apple employees have unionised, but this is just one Apple retail store in the United States, isn't it? So what's the significance here?
Yeah, so this is the tech giant's first retail union in the US, so that's kind of a milestone. They passed the measure 65 to 33 with a dozen abstentions, and after the result came in, the group tweeted, "Now we celebrate, tomorrow we keep organising." So this is a trend that is not going to stop. It's the third Apple store to launch the drive to unionise, but it's the first one to successfully hold the vote and have it pass.
And for people listening in Europe, this may come as something of a surprise that a company the size of Apple doesn't have any unions already.
Yeah, America's had historically a very different relationship with unionisation. It's usually a bit to the right of the UK and Europe, but they're still protected in law. So forming a union in the US means that the company has to voluntarily recognise the union, and workers have to gather signatures for at least 30% of employees so that the National Labour Relations Board can hold a formal election. So there's loads and loads of steps to get through. A couple of the Apple stores have not managed to get there yet. So in Atlanta and in New York, they're trying to get that far. But yeah, this Apple store in Maryland has got that far, and they're celebrating having the first Apple union, and it looks like there'll be more to come.
And like the journalist said in that Al Jazeera piece, Apple haven't publicly issued a statement on any of this, have they? But there were some documents leaked to Vice, which basically showed that they are essentially training their store managers to effectively talk their employees out of joining a union. Did that surprise you, reading that document?
No, not at all. This is what companies and industry bosses have done since the beginning of unionisation. They always try to persuade workers that actually it's their bosses that have their best interests at heart. But I think we can just look at world events, UK events for the last couple of years, and we can see why people are really looking to unionisation as something to help with some terrible working conditions that people are putting up with at the moment.
Or, as we're seeing at the moment, Leaf, which the Chandrika is obliquely referencing there, lots of different employees from lots of different industries threatening to go on strike, really just for a pay rise because of inflation. It's not necessarily that their conditions are so terrible, it's that they can't afford stuff. But that sort of goes for everybody at the moment.
Yeah, exactly. It's people collectively deciding to run in order to stay still in the face of massive food price rises and petrol price rises. Very interestingly, we've seen that next week we'll have the kind of first sort of criminal barristers strike, and it's going to be criminal barristers are basically walking out for 2 days, Monday and Tuesday, because of a kind of total decline in their living standards due to legal aid not really fitting the bill anymore.
Well, I mean, they'd say it's also that they can't do their jobs because, you know, the people they're representing don't have legal aid. That's why they're striking. That's their answer to, but you're on a big salary, why are you striking?
Yeah, exactly. And in the UK, we've actually seen a kind of, obviously, this great decline of union membership. But I was reading a study that was quite interesting in saying that unions tend to flex their muscle in times of economic hardship, so sort of in recessions and so on. There are lots of clouds on the horizon, especially in the UK, in terms of the way our economy seems to be headed. So it looks likely that these union questions will become greater and greater, not only over the summer of discontent, as some of the press tabloids are calling the coming months, but over the next couple of years, perhaps.
The thing I was going to point out is it's sort of related to what Leaf was just saying, is that unionization and strikes and all these things, they're something you get when the pie isn't growing. When the economy is growing and getting bigger and everyone's getting richer and this stuff feels less pressing. But right now, well, in the UK at least, we haven't really had any productivity growth since 2008. We are falling behind other countries in our economic growth, and the other countries aren't doing that great themselves. So everyone is feeling a pinch. Understandably, people then get much more keen to protect their own and bargain and use their bargaining power to get what they can from the pie that exists. When the pie is steadily growing and everyone is getting richer at the same time, it feels more like, okay, it's fine. I'm earning more money than I used to be. I can provide more easily for my family, and that just hasn't been the case. It's been years and years of lost growth, slow growing economy, productivity not doing anything, and certainly in this country, you can point, I think, to bad economic decisions, and I don't want to say Brexit, but is part of that reasoning, and of course also the pandemic has slowed things down. But yeah, it completely makes sense to me that unionization and strikes and all these things are happening at a time when we are just not getting richer like we used to.
I mean, the problem is, Chandrika, how it impacts everybody else's day-to-day life, isn't it? Which is one of the arguments against the train strikes this week, obviously, is that, you know, you're protesting for rights for workers, but then normal workers who can't afford any other way of getting to work can't get to work because of your strike, including some people that were on their way to the RMT protest, couldn't get there because the trains weren't working. I suppose when Apple unionize, you know, that's an easier thing for people to get behind because it's not essential that they get their iPhone that day. And also, you know, you're talking about one of the world's biggest companies. But the implications are if you're withdrawing your work from the front line, that impacts everybody.
So it's a tough one because we just spoke about the barristers and their walkout next week. It's not just a decision based on the cost of living going up. The problems with legal aid have been going on for years and years and years. And similarly with doctors, the British Medical Association is saying it'll prepare a ballot for industrial action unless junior doctors' pay goes up. Now, they were striking the junior doctors for the first time in 30 years back in January 2016, back when I was working at the Mirror and I went and covered it. So, there have been long underlying problems that really have been due to the government that we have not funding a lot of these basic services. And I do think there can be a lot of sympathy, particularly when it's public sector, particularly when it's people we know working in industries that should have a certain level of public funding. And we know that the workers affected and also the care that we receive and the services we receive are not as good either. Having said that, I will say I did turn to the Financial Times to see what they were saying about strikes because they'd be speaking to the paymasters perhaps and not so much the workers. And they've been saying that, look, UK unions have been shrinking just like the US ones, but they're still proportionally about twice as large. So the US, just 1 in 10 people are in a union. In the UK, it's 24%, which to me was quite surprising. Like, did anyone else think it'd be almost a quarter? Still in 2022, that seems surprising. But laws have been brought in successively in the UK to stop us really having a winter of discontent in the same way. Trade unions don't have the same power that they used to, even though quite a lot of people are part of them. And 60% of trade union members do work in the public sector. Now, they're going to get the public sympathy as people not working in essential services like teachers, doctors, frontline people like that, people who've been affected by COVID, people who've been burnt out by COVID. They're going to be in the news stories, they're going to get the sympathy, and it's possibly other people in less visible industries who might not get that public kind of support behind them. But then again, it's hard to know because COVID has really brought home to everyone how, for instance, most people's jobs who are like over 40 and have kids rely on childcare, and it might have changed the way we look at how society works together to allow people to go out to their jobs. Let's see.
But there's a danger as well, isn't there, Leaf, that if your industry hasn't ever had a union at all and then you create one, which is what's happened with this Apple example, that the employer will turn around, look at their profit margins and say, even with the size of a company like Apple, it's more cost effective for us just to sell products through apple.com. So we'll close all our brick and mortar stores because the profit margins don't make it worth our while.
Yeah, there is some danger of that. I was looking into some research this morning that found basically limited evidence that unions have a negative effect on firms, and so I think that this might be slightly one of these myths that when you're as soon as a company gets a union, you can kiss goodbye to the big profits. There are questions to consider, but there's also quite compelling evidence that was published in the New Statesman, which is that countries that have highest rates of union membership tend to have the lowest income inequality. So I think in Iceland, 92% of employees are in a union, and Iceland is obviously famous for its good kind of equality. Yeah, exactly. And high union membership.
That's the country, not the supermarket.
Yeah, both are beautiful, equal places. There's high union density in Denmark, Sweden, Finland. Interestingly, France has very low union density at only about 10%. But the nature of the way people engage with the unions doesn't really come out in that data. But essentially, if we do want to equalize our societies, and to me that seems a kind of a really urgent goal, then increasing unionization is something to be embraced, probably.
Okay, I'm just curious whether any of you are actually in a union.
I mean, I've been writing a bit about this kind of unionization and the train strikes, and it has given me some sort of fantasies of what would happen if all the younger journalists, because I'm a journalist, walked out of the offices? I think an enormous amount would happen. There's a real pay, at least from anecdotal experience, there's a massive pay gap between younger journalists who often have the technical know-how and also are really hardworking, and some of the older journalists who many of whom are great, but there are quite a few sort of legacy salaries going around, which are pretty. You could buy 3 young journalists for the price of one journalist who doesn't know how to turn on their computer. And so I'd be interested to see what would happen if this kind of strike fever came to the world of journalism, but somehow I doubt it will.
Yeah, interesting. Well, I have reached the limit of my mandated hours according to the Podcast Presenting Union, so I'm going to have to end it here. It's out of my hands. My thanks to Tom, Sachandrika and Leaf. You can follow this show for free and get every episode as soon as it's released by searching for The Week Unwrapped wherever you get your podcasts and tapping follow. And remember too to check out our sister show from the week, The Overview. I've been Ollie Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby, the producer Sophie King at Rethink Audio. And until we meet again to unwrap next week, bye-bye.